They laughed at him the moment he walked through the door. Not loudly, not the open, honest laughter of people who have forgotten to be careful. The specific, controlled laughter of people who have learned to perform contempt with elegance. The small smile held a second too long, the eyebrow raised just enough, the way a person looks at someone else and then looks away, as if looking was already more attention than the subject deserved. I watched them do it. I watched every second of it, and I said nothing, because I had planned for this exact moment. My name is Yewande Adeleke-Coker. I am 54 years old. I have been the chairman of Adeleke-Coker Holdings for 19 years, since my husband Bio died, and left me a company that was profitable on paper and structurally fragile in ways that took me 4 years to fully understand and 3 more to fully repair. I have sat across negotiating tables from men who assumed my presence was decorative and discovered, at the cost of their assumptions, that it was not. I have made decisions that were unpopular and correct, and decisions that were popular and wrong, and I have learned, over 19 years of making decisions, that the most important skill is not making the right choice, but knowing which of your choices reveals the truth about a situation you needed to understand. What I had planned for that Sunday dinner was the latter, a choice that would reveal the truth, not about Kolade, about them. If you have ever loved someone and needed to know whether the people around you were worth keeping, really worth keeping, in the honest sense rather than the convenient sense, stay with me, because this story is about what I found out and what I did with it. Subscribe if you want to know how it ends, because the ending is not what any of them expected. Yewande Adesanya had come into my life 11 months before that Sunday dinner, in the way that things come into your life when you have stopped looking for them and started simply living, without agenda, without the particular performance that looking requires. My driver had been sick for a week. This was not unusual. Bello had been with me for 14 years and had the specific loyalty of someone who treated his own health as a secondary concern to the question of whether I had been collected from wherever I needed to be collected from, which meant that when he finally succumbed to something serious enough to keep him at home, it had been serious for longer than he had admitted. I had driven myself that morning, which I did occasionally, and which my security team tolerated, with the specific resigned professionalism of people who have learned that arguing with me about certain things was a less efficient use of everyone's time than simply adapting. The car had developed a fault on the Lekki-Ipe Expressway at 7:40 in the morning, in the particular location on that road where the combination of traffic volume and limited shoulder space made being stationary deeply inconvenient. I had called Bello, who had given me a number from his hospital bed, with the urgency of a man who understood that my being stranded was a situation that required immediate resolution, regardless of his own condition. The number belonged to Adesanya Auto. The voice that answered was unhurried, not slow, unhurried. The specific quality of someone who moves at exactly the pace the situation requires, rather than the pace that nerves or performance might suggest. I told him where I was and what the car was doing. He said, "Throttle body. Probably carbon buildup. It's a 15-minute drive from my workshop. I'll be there in 20. He was there in 18. He arrived in a truck that was practical and clean and well-maintained, not new, not impressive, simply functional in the way of something that was used for its purpose and cared for accordingly. He got out in his work clothes and came to my window and looked at the dashboard I had described on the phone and said, "Yes, throttle body. I can get it moving in 40 minutes. The full clean should be done in the workshop." "How confident are you?" I said. He looked at me directly. "Completely," he said. "But if I'm wrong, I'll tell you within the first 10 minutes, and we'll discuss next steps." He was right within the first 10 minutes. He worked with the focused efficiency of someone who has done the same thing many times, and has refined the doing of it to its essential elements. No wasted movement, no performance of competence. Simply competence, expressed through the work itself. I watched from the car. When he was done, and the engine was running properly again, he gave me a price that was exactly what the work was worth, and not a number chosen to test what the car or the address or the clothing would allow. I paid it. I gave him my card. "For the full service," I said. He looked at the card. He looked at me. "I'll need to see the vehicle's service history," he said. "Not from the card, from whoever has been servicing it." I almost smiled. "I'll have it sent," I said. He nodded. He went back to his truck. I watched him drive away, and I thought, that is a man who does not adjust his behavior based on who is watching. That thought stayed with me for 3 days. The full service brought me to his workshop on a Tuesday morning, and I came myself, rather than sending the driver, because I had been thinking about that thought for 3 days, and I wanted to confirm whether it was accurate or whether it was the impression of a 45-minute roadside encounter that would dissolve on closer contact. The workshop was on a street in Gbagada that was busy in the specific way of working streets. Not the curated busy of commercial districts, but the organic busy of a place where things were actually being made and fixed and moved. The building was not large. It was organized with a precision that was immediately evident. Tools in specific places, parts inventory clearly labeled, vehicles in various stages of work, arranged with the logic of someone who understood workflow rather than just space. He came out when he heard my car. He remembered me without the particular performance of people who need you to know they remember you. "The service history came through," he said. "Your previous workshop was skipping the transmission fluid interval, 3 services in a row." "I know," I said. "That's why I changed workshops." He looked at me briefly. "Good decision," he said. Then he went back to what he had been doing, which was explaining something to a young mechanic who was working on a vehicle in the first bay. I sat in the waiting area, a clean space with plastic chairs and a small table, and a radio playing at a volume that was present but not intrusive, and I watched the workshop work. He moved through it the way a person moves through a space they have built and understand completely, with the ease of someone who does not need to manage the space, because the space and the person are the same thing. 2 hours later, he came to find me. He told me what he had done, and what he had found, and what he recommended. I asked questions. He answered everyone without simplifying them. The answers were as specific as the questions required, which told me he had assessed my level of interest accurately and was responding to the actual person rather than to the category. "How long have you had the workshop?" I said. 12 years, he said. "My father started it. I took it over when he retired." "You expanded it?" I said. "Yes," he said. "Slowly. Only what the work could sustain." "Why slowly?" I said. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has been asked a question that has a real answer and is deciding whether to give the real one. "Because fast expansion in this kind of business usually means compromising on the quality of the work," he said. "And the quality of the work is the only thing I have that isn't replaceable." I looked at him. "You could say the same thing about most businesses," I said. "Most businesses don't," he said. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "They don't." I came back the following week, not for the car, for the conversation. He did not pretend to be surprised. He did not reconfigure himself for the visit. He was exactly who he had been the first time and the second time, and he would be exactly who he was every time after that, which was the thing that made every time after that worth coming for. His name was Yewande Adeleke-Coker. He was 41 years old. He had grown up in the Gbagada neighborhood where his workshop stood, in a house 2 streets from the building his father had started the business in. He had studied mechanical engineering for 2 years before his father's health had required him to come back and help run the workshop. And he had never finished the degree, and had never pretended the absence of the degree was something other than what it was, A choice made under specific circumstances, the right choice for those circumstances, neither a wound nor a credential. He had been married once for 4 years to a woman who had decided, at the end of the 4th year, that a mechanic's life was not the life she had imagined for herself. He spoke about this without bitterness, and without the performing of not being bitter, which was the clearest sign that the bitterness was genuinely absent. He had a daughter, 8 years old. Her name was Tenny. She came to the workshop on Saturday mornings with the focused energy of a child who has decided that wherever her father is, that is the most interesting place to be, and she sat on the stool near his workbench and drew in her notebook, and occasionally asked questions about the engines that he answered with the same seriousness he brought to adult questions, which she received with the satisfaction of someone being taken exactly as seriously as she deserved. I met Tenny on the 3rd Saturday I visited the workshop. She looked at me with the direct, unfiltered assessment of an 8-year-old who had not yet learned to manage her curiosity about new people. "Are you Daddy's friend?" she said. "I'm getting there," I said. She considered this. "He doesn't have many friends," she said. "He has customers, and he has Mama Kiki next door, and he has Uncle Jide who comes on Thursdays." "Then I'll try to be a useful addition," I said. She considered this too. "Can you draw?" she said. "Not well," I said. "Neither can I," she said with the equanimity of someone who has made peace with a limitation. "But I do it anyway." I almost laughed. "That's the right approach," I said. She went back to her notebook. I looked at Kolade. He was watching the exchange with the expression of a parent who has watched their child interact with someone and has learned something from the watching. I understood. Tenny was not a test he had designed, but she was one he trusted, and I had passed it. I did not know, at that point, that I was designing a test of my own. I did not know, at that point, how many people were about to fail it. My family learned about Kolade in the way families learn things they have not been told. Not from me, but from the particular social atmosphere that exists around people of a certain profile in Lagos, where information travels through relationships and events, and the specific efficient network of people who are connected to people who are connected to people who see things. My daughter Simi was the first to call. Simi was 28 years old, and she had her father's face and my discipline, and the combination of these two inheritances had produced someone who was both genuinely capable and genuinely certain of her own capability in ways that occasionally outpaced the evidence. She called me on a Tuesday evening with the tone of someone who has received information and is delivering it in the frame of concern, while the actual frame is something else. "Mummy," she said, "someone told me they saw you at a workshop in Bagada. Twice." "3 times. I said. A pause. "3 times, she repeated. "The car needed service," I said, and then I went back. "For what?" she said. "A conversation," I said. The silence that followed had a specific texture. The texture of someone processing information that is arriving differently than expected. "A conversation with the mechanic," she said. "With the owner of the workshop," I said. "Yes." Another silence. "Mummy?" Her voice had shifted. The concern frame had become the actual frame, which in this case was not concern, but something closer to alarm managed with politeness. "Who is this person?" "His name is Yewande Adeleke-Coker," I said. "He's 41 years old. He runs a workshop his father started. He's one of the most straightforward people I've met in a long time." "Straightforward?" she said, the word landing with the specific flatness of someone for whom straightforward is not, in the context of this conversation, a sufficient credential. "Yes," I said. "Mummy, I think we should talk about this in person," she said. "We are talking about it," I said. "I mean properly," she said. "With everyone." I had expected this. "Fine," I said. "Arrange a Sunday dinner. Invite everyone who should be there." She was quiet for a moment. I think she had expected resistance. The absence of resistance had produced uncertainty. "Everyone?" she said. "Everyone," I said. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had been waiting for this request. That the Sunday dinner was exactly what I had been planning for. That the invitation was not a concession. It was the beginning of the test. My family, assembled at the Sunday dinner table, was the following people. Simi, my daughter, 28, who worked in the company's marketing division with a combination of genuine talent and the specific impatience of someone who believed the path to the top should be shorter than it was proving to be. Deji, my son, 31, who ran the company's Lagos real estate portfolio, and who had his father's charm and a relationship with financial discipline that was more aspirational than practiced. Deji was the one who had called me twice in the week after Simi's call, with the specific urgency of someone for whom urgency is a style rather than a response to actual emergency. My sister Bimpi, 51, who had been my closest confidant for 40 years, and who had, over the last 5, developed the specific opinions about my life that people develop when they have decided that love gives them the right to manage what they love. My mother's younger brother, Uncle Femi, 67, who came to every significant family gathering with the authority of an elder and the particular certainty of someone whose certainty had rarely been successfully challenged. My closest friend of 30 years, Ronki, who was present because I had invited her specifically for reasons that none of the others knew, and Kolade, who arrived at the dinner exactly on time, in the clean shirt and the good trousers that were clearly his version of dressed for an occasion, not expensive, not trying to be expensive, simply clean and well-fitting and honest in the way that his work clothes were honest. He came through the door of my dining room and stood in the particular quality of that room. The chandelier, the imported dining table, the portraits on the wall, the smell of expensive candles, and the food my cook had been preparing since morning. And he stood in it the way he stood in everything, without adjusting, without performing comfort or discomfort. Simply present, exactly as himself, in a room that had already decided what he was before he opened his mouth. I watched my family see him. I watched the laughter that was not laughter, the eyebrow, the small smile, the look away. I noted every one of them, and I said nothing, because the test had begun. The dinner started the way formal family dinners start, when there is a subject that everyone is aware of and no one has yet addressed, with the performance of ordinary conversation, the asking of questions about work and travel and recent events, the careful maintenance of surface, while the actual substance moved beneath it like a current beneath calm water. Khaled answered questions when they were asked of him, and did not volunteer beyond what was asked, which was the behavior of someone who understood that the room had an agenda and was not going to perform for it. Deji asked him what kind of cars the workshop serviced. Kolade answered specifically, makes, model ranges, the particular specializations the workshop had developed over 12 years. Deji nodded with the expression of someone who is gathering information they do not intend to use. Uncle Femi asked where he had grown up. Kolade told him. Gbagada. The specific neighborhood, his father's business, the street. Uncle Femi nodded with the expression of someone who has located a thing correctly on a map they already had. Bimpi said nothing for the first 40 minutes. She was the most intelligent person in the room, after me, and she was watching in the way that intelligent people watch, when they have not yet decided what they think. Simi asked, with the specific brightness of someone who has framed a loaded question as a casual one. Do you ever think about doing something else, beyond the workshop? Kolade looked at her. Sometimes, he said. Then I go back to the workshop and the thought passes. Because you love it? She said. The brightness was still there. Because it's what I'm good at, he said. And because good work is worth doing regardless of what else might be available. A small silence. Ronke, who had been watching from the far end of the table, caught my eye. I did not return the look, but I noted it. Uncle Femi said, and he said it with the authority of someone who has decided that the performance of ordinary conversation has run its course. Yewande, this is a serious matter. The table shifted. The current broke the surface. What matter? I said. This situation, Uncle Femi said. He did not gesture toward Kolade. He did not need to. The direction of the statement was completely clear. You are a woman of this family's standing. There are expectations. There are... Femi, I said. My voice was the same voice I used in board meetings, when someone had said something that required interruption, without the interruption becoming confrontation. Calm, specific, complete. What are you saying? He looked at me. He looked at Kolade. He said, with the specific, considered weight of someone who has decided that decorum no longer requires the soft version. I am saying that what you are doing reflects on all of us. On the children. On the company. On the name. The room was very quiet. Kolade was looking at the table. His hands were flat on either side of his plate. Steady. Unhurried. The hands of someone who has absorbed something and is deciding what to do with it. I looked at my uncle. I looked at my daughter, who had dropped her gaze. At my son, who was looking at his glass. At my sister, who was looking at me with the specific expression of someone who agrees with what is being said and is relieved someone else is saying it. I looked at Ronki, who was looking at all of them with the expression of someone who is watching something and noting it carefully. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, because what I was watching, the dropped gazes, the silence, the specific failure of every person at that table to say a single word in the direction of what was right, was information, and I was collecting it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came after dinner, when I walked Kolade to the gate. He had been quiet for the last 30 minutes of the meal, not the quiet of someone who has been defeated, the quiet of someone who has made a decision to receive something without reacting to it, the specific, disciplined quiet of someone who understands that reacting in the wrong moment is a form of waste. We stood at the gate of the compound in the Lagos night, with the security light above us, and the street sounds beyond the wall, and the particular warmth of the September air, pressing gently on everything. He looked at the street. I looked at him. I'm sorry, I said. He turned to look at me. For what? He said. For the room, I said. He was quiet for a moment. You didn't create the room, he said. You inherited it. I've had 19 years to change it, I said. Some things take longer than 19 years, he said. I looked at him. Are you all right? I said. He considered the question honestly. I've been in rooms that didn't want me before, he said. Different kinds of rooms for different reasons. A mechanic learns to exist in spaces that were not designed with him in mind. He paused. Tonight was not new. It should be new, I said. It should never happen. Yes, he said. It should. He looked at the street again. But I'm not the one who decides whether it does. We stood in the quiet for a moment. Kolade, I said. Yes, I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to answer it honestly, the way you answer everything. Ask it, he said. Does what happened tonight, the way they looked at you, what my uncle said, does it change anything for you? About this? He turned to face me fully. His expression was the same expression he had when he looked at an engine he was certain about. Not confident in the performed sense, but certain in the specific sense of someone who has looked at something carefully and understood it completely. No, he said. Simply. Why not? I said. Because what they think of me and what this is are two different things, he said. I've never confused those two categories. If I started now, I'd have to revise every decision I've made in 12 years. I held his gaze. Good, I said. He looked at me. You expected that answer, he said. I hoped for it, I said. A small silence. Yewande, he said. What are you planning? I almost smiled. I'm not planning anything, I said. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has just been told something that is technically true and functionally incomplete. All right, he said. He did not push it. He was not the kind of person who pushed things before they were ready to be pushed. He left. I stood at the gate for a moment after his car disappeared into the Lagos night. Then I went back inside, to the room where my family was still sitting, waiting. And I sat down, and I looked at all of them, and I said, I'd like to have this conversation properly, if everyone is willing. Bimpe said, Yewande, I'm not asking if you're ready, I said. I'm asking if you're willing. Those are different. The room was quiet, and in the quiet, something began. The conversation lasted 2 hours. I listened more than I spoke, which was a choice rather than a default. I had learned, in 19 years of running a company full of people with strong opinions about things, that the most valuable information in any conversation came from what people said when they believed they were in a space where saying it was safe. My family believed this was a safe space. They were right that it was safe. They were wrong about why. Simi spoke about reputation, about what people in their circle would say, about the specific social arithmetic of a woman of my position being seen with someone of Khalid's. She spoke about it with genuine feeling. She was not performing the concern. She actually had it. And that genuine feeling was the most important information she gave me, because it told me exactly where her hierarchy of values was and what was at the top of it. Deji spoke about the company, about board confidence, about investors and partners, and the specific professional dimension of personal choices, when those choices were made by someone whose personal life was a matter of public interest. He spoke about it with the fluency of someone who had thought about it, which told me he had been thinking about it for longer than 1 week. Uncle Femi spoke about the family name, about what it meant, about the generations of work that had built what the name represented, about responsibility. Bimpe spoke last. She spoke quietly, which was unusual for her, and she looked at me rather than at the table, which was unusual for the evening. Yewande, she said. I know you. I've known you for 50 years, and I know that you are not a woman who makes decisions without understanding them completely. She paused. But I also know that when you are lonely, and you have been lonely, for a long time, in ways you don't say out loud, you are capable of mistaking comfort for something larger than it is. The room was very quiet. I looked at my sister. She was the most honest of them. She was saying something real, and the honesty of it, surrounded by the other things that had been said, was the most painful thing in the room, because honesty about one thing does not redeem blindness about another. Thank you, I said, to all of them, for being honest about what you feel. I stood up. I'm going to be honest about something too, I said. Not tonight. At the right moment. I looked at each of them. I want you to remember this evening. I want you to remember exactly what you said and how you said it and what you chose not to say. I paused. Because it will matter later. Simi looked confused. Deji looked wary. Uncle Femi looked at me with the expression of someone who has heard something they don't fully understand. Bimpe looked at me with the expression of someone who has heard something they understand too well. Ronki said nothing. She caught my eye as I left the room. I held the look for a moment. She nodded, once, with the small precision of someone who has seen enough. I left the room, and I went to my study, and I sat at the desk that had been my husband's desk before it was mine, and I looked at the photograph of Bayo that I kept on the corner of it. Not the formal portrait, but the one from our 3rd year together, before the company was large, when he was still the man who fixed his own leaking tap rather than calling someone, and who laughed at his own jokes before they landed. And I thought about what he would have said. He would have said, "You already know what this is. Stop waiting for permission from people who haven't earned the right to give it." He was right about most things. He was right about that. 3 weeks after the Sunday dinner, I called Ronke. Not a social call, a working call. Ronke was 54 years old, and she had been my closest friend since we were 24, and in 30 years of friendship she had held many roles: confidant, advisor, honest mirror, the person I called when I needed someone who would tell me the truth without the social packaging that truth usually arrives in. She also, as a secondary professional identity that most people in our circle were aware of in the general sense, but not the specific sense, ran a private due diligence and background research firm. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I assumed you'd call," she said. "How long have you assumed?" I said. "Since you invited me to that dinner," she said. "You don't invite me to family dinners by accident." "No," I said. "I don't." "What do you need?" she said. I told her. Not research on Carlada. I had done my own research on Carlada, carefully and thoroughly, in the weeks before the dinner, and what I had found was entirely consistent with what I had observed directly, which was a man of 41 who had built something honest over 12 years with no record of anything that contradicted the honesty. What I needed from Ronke was different. I needed research on my own family. Not the general knowledge I had accumulated over 50 years of living with them. The specific documented reality of their financial positions, their business decisions, their behavior in contexts I was not present for. Because a test, to be a real test, required real information about what was being tested. And what I was testing was not whether my family would accept Colade. What I was testing was who my family actually was. Ronke was quiet for a moment after I explained. Then she said, "Yewande, are you prepared for what I might find?" "I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't," I said. "Some of it might change things," she said. "Not just your opinion of them, practically, structurally." "I know," I said. Another silence. "All right," she said. "Give me 3 weeks." She called me back in 2.5. What she had found was not a surprise in the way that shocking things are surprising. It was a surprise in the way that things you have half known and refuse to look at directly are surprising when someone holds them in the light where you cannot look away. Deji had a debt. Not a business debt, a personal one, accumulated over 18 months through a series of decisions that were, individually, each slightly over the line of what his income and his access to company resources could sustain, and that collectively represented a number that was significant in absolute terms, and more significant in terms of what it meant about where his priorities had been living. The debt was known by 3 people: Deji, the person he owed it to, and, as of 2.5 weeks ago, Ronke, and now me. Simi had been in conversation with a competitor firm for 4 months. Not a job interview, a consulting arrangement, offered and under negotiation. That would have involved her sharing information about the company's marketing strategy. That was, depending on how a lawyer read the relevant clauses of her employment contract, either borderline permissible or clearly not. She had not pursued it past the negotiation stage. But she had negotiated for 4 months. Uncle Femi had borrowed money from the family trust 14 years ago, a sum that had been documented as a loan with repayment terms, and had never repaid it. The sum, with interest, was substantial. The trust documentation was clear. The repayment had simply never been pursued, presumably because pursuing it would have required a conversation that the family had collectively decided not to have. Bimpe. Bimpe's finding was the one I sat with longest. Bimpe had been managing, for 6 years, a small company that was registered in her husband's name, but that operated, on its primary revenue line, as a supplier to Adeleke-Coker Holdings. The arrangement had never been disclosed to the board. The supply contracts had been awarded through the standard procurement process, which meant someone in the procurement department had known and had either not made the connection or had made the connection and decided not to surface it. The margins on those contracts were significantly above market rate, not scandalously, not illegally, as far as Ronki could determine, but above market. In the specific way that above market happens when the person awarding the contract has reason to favor the person receiving it. I sat at my desk for a long time after Ronki finished telling me what she had found. The Lagos night moved through my window in its usual way. The generators, the road sounds, the specific hum of a city that is always going, always building, always indifferent to whatever is being discovered in the rooms it contains. I thought about Sunday dinner, about the eyebrow, the small smile, the look away, about my uncle talking about the family name, about Simi talking about reputation, about Bimpy, the most honest of them, talking about loneliness and comfort and what love could mistake itself for. And I thought about Kool-Aid at my gate, saying, "What they think of me and what this is are two different things. I've never confused those two categories." I thought about that for a long time. Then I called Ronki back. "Thank you," I said. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm going to give them a chance," I said. "One chance, to show me they are who I want them to be, rather than who this evidence suggests they might be." "How?" she said. "A second dinner," I said, "with Koladi, and something they don't know is coming." A silence. "Yewande," she said. "Yes." "Be careful," she said. "Not with them, with yourself. Sometimes the test costs the person giving it as much as the person taking it." I thought about that. "I know," I said. "I'm prepared." "Are you?" she said. I thought about Bayo's photograph on the corner of the desk. I thought about Kolad at the workshop, moving through the space that was his without performing ownership of it. I thought about Tenny on her stool, drawing in her notebook, saying, "I do it anyway." "Yes," I said. "Then I'll come to the second dinner too," Ronki said. "I was going to ask," I said. "I know," she said. She hung up. I sat at the desk. Outside, the Lagos night continued its enormous, indifferent life. And inside, in the quiet of my study, the second part of what I had planned was taking shape. Not as revenge, not as punishment, but as the thing it had always been from the beginning. A reckoning. The kind that families rarely survive in the form they had before it, and the kind that, when it is honest, and when it is complete, sometimes produces something that is worth more than what came before. Sometimes. I was about to find out which kind this would be. The second dinner was set for a Saturday evening 3 weeks after the first. I chose Saturday deliberately. Not Sunday. Sunday had the weight of family obligation, the specific pressure of a day that belongs to ritual rather than choice. Saturday was different. Saturday was elected. People who came to a Saturday dinner came because they had decided to come, and what people decided when they had options told you more about them than what they did when obligation required it. I sent the invitations through the same channels as the first dinner. A message to each person, specific, personal, with the time and the expectation that they would be present. I added one line that was not in the first invitation. "There is something I need to say to everyone together. Please come prepared to listen." Simi called within an hour of receiving hers. "What are you going to say?" she said. "If I told you now, there would be no point gathering everyone," I said. "Is it about the company?" she said. "It's about the family," I said. A silence. "Is Kool-Aid coming?" she said. "Yes," I said. Another silence, longer. "Mummy," she said, "whatever you're planning." "Simi," I said. "Come on Saturday, listen. That's all I'm asking." She came. They all came. Deji arrived first, which was unusual. Deji was characteristically last, the lateness a performance of ease that had long since become habit. The earliness told me the invitation's final line had produced something in him that earliness was trying to manage. Uncle Femi came next, with the specific bearing of someone who had decided that whatever was being announced, he would receive it with the authority appropriate to his position in the family. Bimpe came with her husband Tunde, which I had not expected. I had not included Tunde in the invitation, and Bimpe knew it, which meant she had decided that having Tunde present was something she needed, which told me the invitation's final line had produced something specific in her too. I noted Tunde's presence without commenting on it. Ronke came and sat where she had sat at the first dinner, and said nothing to anyone beyond the greetings that the arrival required. Khalid came at 7 exactly. He came in the same clean shirt and good trousers. He came with the same quality of presence he always brought to everything, unhurried, specific, entirely himself. He greeted the people he had met at the first dinner with the directness of someone who does not perform warmth, but does not withhold it either. Deji shook his hand with a grip that was slightly more deliberate than the first dinners had been. The grip of someone who has been thinking about a person and has arrived at a revised position, but hasn't yet decided how to express it. Simi said, "Hello, Kolade." Carefully, without the brightness of the first dinner, which was an improvement. The brightness had been a weapon. The carefulness was at least honest. Uncle Femi nodded. Bimpe looked at him, and then at me, and then back at him with the expression of someone who is trying to solve a problem they have not yet fully defined. We sat. Mama Chioma served the food. The meal was different from the first dinner, quieter on the surface, with the specific quality of a room that has been told something is coming and is managing its anticipation by maintaining the form of ordinary. People ate. People asked about food. People said things about the week that were true but not significant. I let it run, because the form of ordinary was also information. Who maintained it and who couldn't, who ate and who moved food around the plate, who talked and who went quiet. All of it was information, and I was still collecting. Deji ate. Simi did not eat much. Uncle Femi ate and talked about a property matter, in a way that was clearly the performance of someone who was filling silence with content rather than communicating. Bimpe watched me. Tunde watched his food. Ronke ate with the appetite of someone who was not performing anything. Kolade ate steadily, without self-consciousness, with the quality he brought to all things, present, focused, not managing the room's opinion of him. When the plates were cleared, and Mama Chioma had brought the tea and the small pastries that I served at the end of meals, I set down my cup, and I looked at the table. The room went quiet, not because I had asked it to, because the quality of my attention had changed, and rooms respond to that change the way engines respond to a shift in load, immediately and completely. "I want to thank you all for coming," I said. Both times. A pause. "The first dinner," I said, "I called a family dinner. I invited Kolade because he is part of my life, and because the people who matter to me should know the people I choose." I paused. What happened at that dinner told me things I needed to know. Simi looked at her hands. Deji was very still. "Over the last 3 weeks," I said, "I've been thinking about what I heard, not just what was said about Kolade, though I heard that clearly, but what was said about what matters to this family, about reputation, about the family name, about what is appropriate." I paused. Those are real concerns. They come from real places. I don't dismiss them. Uncle Femi nodded slowly. He thought the acknowledgement was heading somewhere comfortable. It was not. "But they raised a question for me," I said. The question was, are the people in this room as careful about reputation and the family name and what is appropriate in their own lives as they are about mine? The room changed. Not dramatically. The specific, quiet change of a room that has registered a shift in direction and is reassessing where it is headed. "I want to be clear about something," I said. "What I'm about to say is not punishment. It is not revenge. It is a conversation that should have happened a long time ago and that I am responsible for not having sooner. I paused. Because I created the conditions that made it possible. By not looking. By preferring the version of this family that I wanted to believe in over the version that was actually there. Bimpy was looking at me now with the full force of her attention. She knew. I could see it in her face. Not what specifically I knew, but that I knew something. She had always been the most perceptive of them, and perception in this moment was not working in her favor. "Deji," I said. My son looked at me. "There is a debt," I said. "Personal, accumulated over 18 months. I know the amount and I know who it's owed to and I know the decisions that produced it." The blood left Deji's face in the specific way that blood leaves the face of someone who has just learned that a private thing is no longer private. "I'm not asking you to explain it tonight," I said. "I'm telling you that I know, and that we will deal with it, together, with a plan that is realistic, and that does not require you to manage it alone." I paused. Because managing things alone is what produced the problem. He said nothing. His hands were flat on the table. "Simi," I said. My daughter looked up. 4 months of conversations with Ekweme strategic partners, I said. I know the terms that were under discussion. I know what information was in the scope of what you were offering. I looked at her directly. I also know you didn't finalize it. I need you to tell me why. Simi's face had gone through surprise, and then something that was not quite shame, and was not quite relief. The expression of someone who has been caught doing something they had already decided not to do, and who is now uncertain whether the decision not to do it counts in a context where the doing of it is already known. I realized it was wrong, she said quietly. When? I said. A pause. Month 3, she said. Then you spent 1 more month in the conversation, I said. She didn't answer. I'm not asking you to explain that either, I said. I'm telling you I know, and that we will talk about it, about why it started and what it was a response to, because I think it was a response to something real, something about how you feel in this company, about your place in it, about the pace of things. And that real thing deserves a real conversation. She looked at me. Something moved in her eyes, not tears, but the specific quality of someone who has just had the frame around their behavior expanded by someone seeing it more generously than they had expected. I looked at Uncle Femi. He had the expression of someone who has been watching a controlled detonation and is now calculating how close it will come to his own position. Femi, I said. The trust loan from 2009. The documentation is clear about the terms. The repayment was never made. A silence. Uncle Femi looked at the table. He was 67 years old, and he had spent 67 years in the specific posture of someone for whom authority was the natural state, and watching that posture encounter something it couldn't absorb with authority was the specific kind of difficult to watch. The amount plus interest is significant, I said. I am not pursuing it through legal channels. I am not removing you from family events or from your role as an elder. I am telling you that I know, and that at some point in the next month, you and I will sit down, and we will agree on a resolution that is fair to the trust and to you, and we will document it properly. I paused. Because what the family name actually means is not just how we present ourselves in public. It is how we treat each other in private. And a debt unacknowledged is not a small thing. He said nothing. He looked at Kolade briefly, then away. And in that brief look, in the specific quality of it, the involuntary quality of someone measuring their own exposure against the presence of an outsider who was witnessing it, I saw the thing I had been waiting to see. The understanding that the outsider had not been the problem, the mirror. That was the problem. I looked at Bimpy. My sister was already looking at me. She had the expression of someone who has been holding a thing for a long time and is now sitting in the moment when the holding ends, and what they feel is not relief and is not dread, but is the specific, complete exhaustion of the holding itself finally being acknowledged. "Bimpi," I said. "Koremi Supplies, 6 years, 14 contracts." Her husband Tunde shifted in his seat. Bimpi did not shift. She held my gaze. "The margins," I said. "The non-disclosure to the board." I paused. "I know why you didn't tell me, because telling me would have required you to give it up. And you didn't want to give it up because it was yours. Something you had built, separately from me, from everything I built. From the shadow that everything I built cast on the space you had to build in." Bimpi's eyes were wet. Not crying. The specific, controlled quality of someone who is holding tears through an act of will. "I understand that," I said. "I understand it better than you know, because I spent the first 5 years after Bayo died watching you manage a grief you didn't think you were allowed to express fully because it was my grief and not yours. And I understood that you were doing something important in those Koremi contracts. You were building something that was not mine. That was the impulse." I paused. "But the mechanism was wrong, and it needs to be corrected." A silence. Then Bimpi said, "Yewande." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. It came out full and real without the packaging that apologies usually arrive in. Just the thing itself. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry too, for the conditions I created." The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not uncomfortable. The kind that is the specific aftermath of something true being said in a space that was ready for it. Tunde was looking at his hands. He was a careful man, Tunde, and careful men in rooms where something significant is happening tend to look at their hands. I looked at Kolode. He was looking at the table. Not at the floor, not at his hands. At the table, with the expression of someone who is present to something without intruding into it. When he felt my look, he raised his eyes. I held his gaze. He held mine back, and in his face, in the specific, complete quality of his attention, I saw the thing I had seen at the gate of the workshop the first day, and at the roadside on the expressway, and on every Saturday morning in the 12 months that had brought us here. A man who was exactly who he was, in every room, under every condition, without adjustment. I turned back to the table. "I want to say one more thing," I said. "And then I want us to eat the rest of this food and drink the rest of this tea and be a family in the honest sense of the word, which is more difficult and more worth something than the performed sense." The room waited. "I planned this evening," I said. "Both evenings. The first dinner, the second dinner, the research, the timing, all of it was deliberate." I paused. Not because I wanted to trap anyone, because I needed to know who this family actually is. Not the version I had been choosing to see. The real version. I looked at each of them. Because I am 54 years old, and I am going to spend the years I have left being honest about what I have, and who I am, and who I choose. And I needed to know if the people closest to me were capable of the same honesty. A silence. "Are you?" I said. Nobody spoke immediately. Then Deji said, and his voice had a quality it didn't usually have, the quality of something unmanaged and therefore real. "I've been trying to handle things alone my whole life. Because I didn't want to be the one who needed help from the person who never needed it." He was looking at me. "That's me," I said. "I'm the person you were trying not to need." "Yes," he said. "I've known that for years," I said. "I made it true by being the kind of person who handled everything before anyone could offer to help." I paused. "We made it together." He looked at his hands. Then he looked up. "I'll tell you everything," he said. "The whole thing. what I owe and why and how. Thank you, I said. Simi said, the conversation with Yewande. I want to explain it properly, not as an excuse, as context. Good, I said. I want to hear it. Uncle Femi cleared his throat, the sound of someone who has arrived at a decision. The trust matter, he said. I should have addressed it long ago. I knew it was wrong not to. He paused. Pride is an expensive thing. It is, I said. He looked at Kolade, and something happened in his face that I had not anticipated, something that surprised me even in a room I had designed for surprises. Young man, he said. Kolade looked at him. I owe you an apology, Uncle Femi said. What I said at the first dinner was directed at you without being fair to you. I made assumptions that were not based on evidence. He paused. In my generation, we called it knowing a person's place. But a person's place is not something one generation decides for another. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at Kolade. I was wrong. The room absorbed this. Kolade looked at the older man with the expression he brought to everything, present, clear, without performance. I appreciate that, he said, directly, without inflation. It's the least due, Uncle Femi said. Bimpy looked at Kolade. I didn't say anything at the first dinner, she said. When Femi spoke, I should have. I didn't because I agreed with the feeling if not the words. And now... She stopped. Now I think the feeling was also wrong, and saying nothing made me part of it. Kolade looked at her. The feeling comes from somewhere real, he said. I'm not asking anyone to pretend it doesn't. Bimpy looked at him. What does that mean? She said. Not defensively, genuinely. It means you love your sister, he said. And you were worried. The worry was honest, even if the way it came out wasn't. He paused. I can work with honest worry. It's the kind that wears other clothes I have trouble with. Bimpy was quiet. Then she said, You're not what I expected. People rarely are, he said. And something happened in the room then, something that I had hoped for but had not assumed, because hope and assumption are different disciplines, and I had learned, over 54 years, to be rigorous about the difference. The room became something else. Not resolved, not fixed, not the comfortable performance of family that the first dinner had started as. Something harder and more valuable than that. Something that had been cracked open and was now, carefully and tentatively, beginning to breathe in the specific way that things breathe when the thing that was blocking the air has been removed. Deji refilled Kolade's glass. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. The weeks that followed were not simple. I said this about the weeks after the boardroom, and I will say it again here, because it is always true of the weeks that follow the moments that matter, and it deserves to be said without the softening that narrative sometimes applies to reality. Deji's debt required 3 months of structured resolution. I brought in a financial advisor who was not connected to the company, who worked with Deji to build a repayment plan that was realistic and that did not require him to diminish himself in the process of fulfilling it. The conversations between the two of us, between mother and son, outside the professional architecture, were difficult in the way that honest conversations between people who have spent years in careful distance are difficult. We said things to each other that had needed to be said for years. Some of those things were uncomfortable. All of them were necessary. By the end of the 3rd month, the debt was on its way to being resolved, and what had replaced it, tentatively, imperfectly, but really, was a different kind of conversation. One where he called me, not just with updates and problems, but occasionally with nothing in particular. The way you call someone when their voice is the thing you need rather than the information. That was the most significant thing. Simi and I had 4 long conversations about Yewande strategic partners and what had driven her toward it, and what the company had failed to give her that she had been looking for there. What came out of those conversations was a restructuring of her role. Not a promotion, not a reward for behavior that had been questionable, but an honest recalibration of what she was actually capable of and what the company was currently not using. She was better than her title suggested. The title had been kept small, I understood eventually, because of my own reluctance to be seen to be favoring her. The reluctance had produced an injustice I had not been looking at. I corrected it. The board approved the revised role without discussion, which told me the board had been aware of the underutilization longer than I had been prepared to see it. Uncle Femi and I sat down with the trust documentation in January. He arrived at the meeting with his own lawyer, which was both appropriate and a signal. He was taking it seriously. We agreed on a repayment schedule. We signed it. At the end of the meeting, he looked at me and said, "Your father would have done this the same way, directly and without ceremony." He paused. He was a good man. I said, "I know. I try to remember it." That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Bimpe was the most complicated. Not because the Karemi situation was the most complex practically. It was not, once Ronke had mapped it out with the specificity of someone who understood both the legal dimensions and the emotional ones. It was complicated because Bimpe was my sister. And the thing between sisters who have loved each other for 50 years and have hurt each other for the same 50 years is not something that a single reckoning, however honest, resolves completely. What we did, over several months of dinners that were not planned, and conversations that started as something else and became what they needed to be, was begin to close a distance that had been growing for years in the specific, invisible way that distances grow between people who are technically present to each other and emotionally managing, rather than meeting. Karemi Supplies was disclosed to the board. Bimpe stepped back from the active management of the contracts. The above-market arrangements were renegotiated to market rate. Nobody outside the family and the board was told the full history because nobody outside the family and the board needed to be. What mattered was that it was corrected, and that the conversation that had been avoided for 6 years had finally been had. Khaled was present for none of the family conversations that followed the second dinner. Not because he was excluded. He was not excluded from anything, deliberately, by me or eventually by the family. But because those conversations were what they were, and what they were was the specific internal work of a family that had decided to see itself clearly, and that work belonged to the people doing it. He understood this. He had said, when I told him the broad shape of what had happened at the second dinner and what was now being worked through, "I'm glad." Simply, without needing to know more than that. "You don't want to know the details?" I said. "Not unless there's something you need me to know," he said. "There isn't," I said. "Then I don't need to know it," he said. "That's your family. What you're doing with them is yours." I looked at him. "Most people would be curious," I said. "Most people make other people's business their business because their own isn't enough," he said. He went back to the carburetor he had been cleaning. "Mine is enough." I sat in the plastic chair. The workshop did its usual work around us. Tenny was on her stool with her notebook, drawing something that appeared to be a very detailed rendering of the engine Khaled was working on, which she had been studying for 20 minutes, with the focused interest of someone who has decided to understand something. "Daddy," she said, without looking up from her notebook, "when the engine is cleaned, does it work better, or just differently?" Khaled looked up from his work. "Better," he said. "The dirt is what makes it work harder than it needs to. Clean it and it uses the same energy to do more." Tenny considered this. "Like people?" she said. Khaled looked at her, then at me. "Like people," he said. She went back to her drawing. I looked at the workshop around me. The tool wall, the organized bays, the radio at its low and constant volume, the particular quality of a space that has been built by someone who understood what the space was for, and had built it exactly to that purpose, no more and no less. I had been coming here for 11 months. I had come for the conversation and stayed for the person, and understood, slowly and then completely, that what I had found here was something I had not been looking for, because I had stopped believing it was still available to find. A space where I was not the chairman of anything, not the widow of anyone, not the mother or the sister or the elder or the name. Just Yewande. The version of myself that existed before the company and the children and the years of managing everything at the level where management is indistinguishable from performance. Just Yewande, in a plastic chair, in a working space, with the smell of engine oil and the radio, and a 9-year-old drawing engines in a notebook, and asking questions that contained more wisdom than most board meetings I had attended. I had found this, in a workshop on a Bagada street, with a man who had told me, the first time I really listened, good work is worth doing regardless of what else might be available. He had been talking about his workshop. He had been talking about everything. The announcement came on a Wednesday in April. Not a press release. I did not issue press releases about my personal life, and I was not going to start. But the Lagos social world is what it is, and the announcement was the simple, specific fact of Kolade attending a company event with me as my guest, which was reported in one of the business publications that covered the social dimensions of the corporate world, which was reported in other publications, which was discussed in the specific way that things are discussed in the network of people who are connected to people who are connected to people who see things. The discussion was what it was. Some of it was the discussion I had anticipated. Photographs, speculation, the particular social accounting of a woman of my profile and a man of his, the inevitable comparisons, and the inevitable opinions from people who had no information about either of us beyond what a photograph contained. Some of it surprised me. Not the positive responses, though there were positive responses, from people whose positions I had not expected, who expressed admiration with the specific warmth of people who have been waiting for someone else to do something they had wanted to do themselves. What surprised me was a call I received 2 days after the publication from a woman I had met twice at industry events, who had built a significant logistics company over 20 years and who had the reputation of someone who said exactly what she meant and nothing additional. "I read about you," she said. "I want to have lunch." "All right," I said. We had lunch. She said, "I have been managing the opinions of people about my personal choices for 30 years. I am tired of it. Watching you not manage it was—" She stopped. She was not a woman who searched for words, which meant she was searching for the precise one. "Instructive," she finished. "I didn't do anything dramatic," I said. "You showed up with him," she said, "at a company event, without a narrative about it, without management." She looked at me. That's the dramatic part, the absence of management. I thought about that. "He doesn't need management," I said. "He handles himself." She smiled. "Tell me about the workshop," she said. I told her. By the end of the lunch, she had decided to bring her fleet to Adesanya Auto for the next service cycle. I had not suggested it. She had arrived there herself, which was, I thought, exactly the right way to arrive at anything worth having. 2 years after the second dinner, I made a decision that I had been building toward without fully naming it for 18 months. I changed the company's succession structure, not dramatically. The change was legal and procedural, worked through the board with the proper documentation and the appropriate consultation. But the substance of it was significant. The previous structure had assumed a simple transfer of chairmanship to the eldest child, which meant Deji, which had been the assumption for 20 years, and which was an assumption I had never examined critically, because examining it would have required examining other things simultaneously. The new structure established a professional governance board that would oversee the transition. with both Simi and Deji holding equal non-executive positions and the operational leadership coming from the management team that had been built over 19 years. And that was, in my honest assessment, better equipped to run the company than either of my children at their current stages of development. I explained this to Simi and Deji before I took it to the board. I explained it the way I explained everything now, directly, with full information, with the specific respect of someone who believed the people receiving the information could handle accurate information rather than managed versions of it. Deji was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This is because you don't trust me." "No," I said. "This is because you are 31 years old and you have genuine capabilities that are being developed and that the company needs in a specific role, not in the top role. The top role at 31, before those capabilities are fully formed, would not be good for you or the company." I paused. "I've made decisions that prioritize the appearance of family succession over the reality of what the company needed. I'm not making that decision again." He looked at me. "When will I be ready?" he said. "When you're ready," I said. "Not when a number says you are." A silence. "How will I know?" he said. "You'll know," I said. "And I'll tell you." He looked at the table. Then he looked up. "All right," he said. Simi said, "The governance board. Who's on it?" "Mrs. Chidinma Obi," I said. "She's been on 2 boards, I trust, and her track record is—" "I know her reputation," Simi said. "She's good." A pause. "Can I be involved in the board selection process?" "That's exactly the kind of involvement I want you to have," I said. She nodded. We were not the family we had been 2 years ago. We were something harder to describe and more worth being. Khaled came to the board presentation, not as a board member. As my guest, sitting in the back of the room with the expression he always brought to rooms that were not his. Attentive, present, not performing anything. The board approved the restructuring unanimously. Afterward, in the car, he said, "How do you feel?" "Like I set something down that I've been carrying in the wrong configuration for 20 years, I said. "Better, or just differently," he said. I looked at him. He was looking at the road, but there was something in his expression, the small private quality that meant he knew exactly what he had said and what it referred to. "Better," I said. "Definitely better." He nodded. We drove through the Lagos afternoon in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have learned each other well enough to know what the silence contains. "Taney asked about you," he said. "What did she ask?" I said. "She asked if you were going to be around more," he said. "I said that was a question for you." I looked at him. "What did she say when you said that?" I said. She said, "Tell her yes." He paused. In the tone she uses when she has already decided something and is informing the relevant parties. I laughed. The real laugh. The one that arrived without preparation. "She's 9 years old," I said. "She's my daughter," he said. "She's been making executive decisions since she was 4. "She gets it from her father," I said. He looked at me with the expression he had when something landed exactly where it was aimed. "Yes," he said. We drove the rest of the way through the city, with the afternoon pressing warm and gold through the windows, and the Lagos traffic doing its usual enormous and unreasonable thing around us, and the radio on low, and neither of us needing the silence to be filled. 3 years after the first dinner where they laughed, Simi sat across from me in my office on a Tuesday afternoon, with a proposal document in front of her and the expression of someone who has prepared something and is presenting it with the combination of confidence and genuine uncertainty that comes from knowing the work is good and not yet knowing how it will be received. The proposal was for a new division, a social enterprise arm of the company that would provide subsidized business development services to small operators in the manufacturing sector. The financial model was realistic. The implementation timeline was detailed. The expected return on social investment was documented with the specific rigor of someone who had learned that good intentions without numbers are opinions rather than proposals. She had been working on it for 4 months, without telling me. I read it completely. Then I looked up. "This is good," I said. She exhaled slightly, the specific exhale of someone who has been holding a breath they hadn't admitted to holding. "I want to pilot it in 3 markets," she said. "Ibadan, Port Harcourt, and Enugu. The Enugu connection gives us a natural anchor because of the supplier relationships we have there." "The Enugu connection," I said. She met my eyes. "Emeka's training program," she said. "The Chukwuemeka Obiora Vocational Trust in Enugu. If you give me the introduction, the program could be a model for what we're trying to build." I looked at my daughter. 28 years old at the first dinner. 31 now. The difference was not just the number. It was the quality of what the 3 years had produced in her. A woman who had started from a place of social arithmetic and had arrived, through the specific hard work of looking at herself honestly, at a place where the arithmetic included people who had previously not been in her calculations. "I'll make the introduction," I said. She smiled. "The real one. The one she had not often shown me before 3 years ago." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," I said. "Build it." She left my office with the proposal under her arm and the energy of someone who has been given a clear road and intends to run. I sat at my desk for a moment. I thought about Kool-Aid at the expressway in the early morning, looking at my dashboard and saying, "Throttle body, probably carbon buildup." I thought about a plastic chair in a workshop and a child on a stool and a radio at a low and constant volume, and the smell of engine oil and the particular quality of a space that was exactly what it was supposed to be. I thought about a Sunday dinner and the laughter that was not laughter, about an eyebrow raised, a small smile, a look away, about the specific, controlled contempt of people who had decided what someone was before looking, about what the test had found, and what we had built from what the test had found. Not resolution, not the clean, narrative arc of a family that had been shown the truth and had transformed. Real things don't transform. They develop, slowly, imperfectly, with the specific difficulty of growth that is chosen rather than forced. What we had built was development. Real, slow, chosen. And underneath it, underneath the succession restructuring and Deji's managed debt and Simi's proposal and Uncle Femi's repayment schedule and Bimpy's corrected contracts, underneath all of it was the thing the test had actually been testing for. Not whether they could accept Kolade, whether they could accept the truth about themselves, and whether a family that had looked at itself honestly could become the kind of family worth being honest with. The answer, 3 years in, was yes. With difficulty, with backsliding and conversations that started badly and ended better, and relationships that were more complicated and more real than they had been when they were simple and performed. But yes, on a Saturday morning in October, 3 years and 2 months after the first dinner, I sat in the plastic chair in the workshop on the Gbagada street and watched Kolade walk Tenny through the throttle body of the car in Bay 2, explaining what it did and why it got dirty and what happened when it was dirty and what cleaning it required. Tenny was 12 now. She listened with the same focused attention she had brought to everything since she was 8, but with the additional quality of someone who had been accumulating knowledge for 4 years and was now at the point where the knowledge was beginning to connect into understanding. "The dirt is what makes it work harder than it needs to," she said, repeating something she had heard 3 years ago and had apparently kept. "Yes," Kolade said. "So if you clean it at the right intervals," she said, "it never gets bad enough to cause a problem." "That's preventive maintenance," he said. "It's the same as everything," she said, with the equanimity of someone who has arrived at a principle and is filing it. He looked at her. Then he looked at me. And in his face was the same expression it had always been, present, complete, exactly itself. The face of a man who was where he was supposed to be, doing what he was supposed to be doing in the full honesty of his own life. I thought about 54 years, about the things I had built and the things I had let become complicated, and the things I had finally looked at directly, and the things I had found when I looked. I thought about a test designed to reveal the truth, about what the truth had revealed, about a family that was difficult and real and developing and mine, about a workshop on a street in Gbagada that smelled of engine oil and honest work, and the particular irreplaceable quality of a space that was exactly what it was supposed to be, about a man who had never adjusted himself for any room he had ever entered, and about the 12-year-old who had just explained preventive maintenance with the confidence of someone who understood, at 12, something that most people spent their whole lives not understanding. The most important work is not fixing what is broken. It is understanding what breaks, and doing the work consistently and honestly before the breaking becomes the story. My name is Yewande Adeleke-Coker. I am 57 years old. I am the chairman of a company I have been building for 19 years. I am the mother of 2 people who are becoming, slowly and honestly, who they were always supposed to be. I am the sister of a woman who is learning, as I am learning, that the distance between people who love each other is almost always smaller than the effort required to cross it suggests. And I am the person who sat in a plastic chair in a workshop on a Gbagada street and understood, finally and completely, that the most important test is not the one you design for other people. It is the one that life designs for you. And that passing it requires the same thing that every engine requires: honesty about what is dirty, willingness to clean it, and the discipline to do the maintenance before the fault becomes the failure. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of Yewande's patience, Kolade's dignity, and the slow, honest work of a family deciding to see itself clearly, then subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know that the people worth keeping are the ones who tell you the truth. Leave a comment and tell us which moment changed something in you, because the next story is already waiting. And it begins, as always, with someone being underestimated for the very last time. Stay with us.